A very good evening to Sejaba. Today, my group members and I would like to present the analysis in economics, which we choose United States for our country that we use. We would like to present about the analysis that we did for assignment 1. My name is Claressa Vaneyda. So before we go to the content of the analysis, I would like to present about the introduction of this analysis. So basically, in this analysis, we choose United States for the country that we use. There are many issues such as inflation and unemployment issues, impacts of COVID-19 on inflation and unemployment, and how monetary and fiscal policies. For inflation, it is a general and ongoing rise in the level of prices in an entire economy. Inflation does not refer to a change in relative prices. A relative price change occurs when you see that the price of tuition has risen, but the price of laptops has fallen. The discussion is focused on inflation break-even rate, what it means, and the factors that influence it. Although some discussion of valuation techniques appears, it certainly does not represent investment advice. There are also the impacts of COVID-19 that we are having now, which are getting worse. Many ways that can be used in this analysis, where United States is one of the countries which have the most number of people dying because of COVID-19. So let's move to what is inflation. Inflation is a quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level of a basket of selected goods and services in an economy increases over some period of time. Inflation thus indicates a decrease in the purchasing power of a nation's currency. Inflation can be contrasted with deflation, which occurs when prices instead decline. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising and consequently the purchasing power of currency is falling. So basically, inflation is classified into three types. The first one is demand pull inflation, the second one is cost push inflation, and the last one, which is the third one, is built-in inflation. So there are three types of inflation. So here, inflation can be viewed positively or negatively depending on the individual viewpoint and rate of change. Those with tangible assets like property or stock commodities may like to see some inflation as that raises the value of their assets. People holding cash may not like inflation, as it erodes the value of their cash holdings. An optimum level of inflation is required to promote spending to a certain extent instead of saving, thereby nurturing economic growth. So this is the statistic of what happened for October 2019 to January 2020 and moves to April 2020 and next July 2020. So for the first one, October 2019, we can see that it increases time to time. It increases number to number. For example, like on January 2020 is the biggest rate, is the highest rate, and it is the highest number of COVID-19. How inflation and unemployment are related. The relationship between inflation and unemployment has traditionally been an inverse correlation. However, this relation is more complicated than it appears at first glance and has broken down on a number of occasions over the past 45 years. Since inflation and unemployment are two of the most closely monitored economic indicators, we will delve into the relationship and how they affect the economy. So that's all from me. I will move the presentation to my group members. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Melc James. I will present about unemployment issue. In this presentation, I will focus about main causes of unemployment in United States of America. Job creation and employment are affected by factors such as aggregate demand, global competition, education, automation, and demographic. This factor can affect the number of workers, the duration of unemployment, and wage rate. There are a variety of domestic, foreign, market, and government factors that impact unemployment in United States. This may be categorized as cyclical or structural and include the first one is economic condition. The U.S. faced the subprime mortgage crisis and resulting recession of 2007 until 2009, which significantly increased the unemployment rate to a peak of 10% in October 2009. The unemployment rate fell steadily thereafter, returning to 5% by December 2015 as economic conditions improved. The second one is demographic trend. The U.S. has an aging population, which is moving more persons out of the labor force relative to the civilian population. This has resulted in a long-term downward trend in the labor force participation rate that began around 2000 as the baby boomer generation began to retire. Technology trends, with automation replacing workers in many industries while creating jobs in others. The fourth is globalization and searching trends, with employers creating jobs in overseas market to reduce labor costs or avoid regulation. The fifth is international trade policy, which has resulted in a sizable trade deficit, which is import greater than export since the early 2000s, which reduced GDP and employment relative to a trade surplus. The sixth is immigration policy, which affect the nature and number of workers entering the country. Okay. After that is monetary policy. Monetary policy is the Federal Reserve conduct monetary policy, adjusting interest rate to move the economy towards a full employment target of around 5% unemployment rate and 2% inflation rate. The Federal Reserve has maintained near zero interest rate since the 2007 until 2009 recession in effort to boost employment. It also injected a sizable amount of money into the economy via quantitative easing to boost the economy. In December 2015, it raised interest rate for the first time moderately, with guidance that it intends to continue doing if economic conditions were favorable. After that, fiscal policy. For fiscal policy, is the federal government has reduced its budget deficit significantly since the 2007 until 2009 recession, which result from a combination of improving economic condition and recent step to reduce spending and raise tax or higher income taxpayer. Reducing the budget deficit means the government is doing too less to support employment, other things equal. The last one is a unionization. The ratio of persons represented by unions has fallen consistently since the 1960, weakening the power of labor relative to capital. This is due to a combination of economic trend and policy choice. That's all from me. Thank you.
I will be presenting impacts of COVID-19 on unemployment in America. Due to COVID-19, it has done a great influence to the curve of unemployment rate in America. For what I found on my research, the percentage on March till June was higher than years before. The rate was at 14.4%, which has never been on the records in America before. As you guys can see on this GDP, the peak at July 2020 was at 10.2%. This is because of the sudden notice of lockdown that happened globally. All shops was directed to close their shops for a while until the spread of the virus slowly goes down. Not all of the population has jobs and enough savings to go through the pandemic, which businesses are closed. This means no money supply. When there is no money supply, some business owners might have trouble to pay their workers, and not all of them have insurance to cover their business damages, not to mention the small business owners. This is where the monetary and fiscal policies step in to help to stabilize the situation. In this GDP, as you guys can see, In August 2020, the percentage was decreasing to 8.4%, and thankfully in September, America has gone to a phase of recovery which at 8.4%. In this case, we will have to use the monetary and fiscal policies to maintain unemployment issues. I will continue to how monetary and fiscal policies help the economy situation America is facing in pandemic. So, what is monetary policy? Monetary policy is a policy where it employs the central bank's control at the employs the central bank's control of the supplies of money as an equipment for achieving the goals of the general economic policy. There are four types of options in monetary policy. The first one is open market operation. The second one is lowering the reserves requirement. The third one is lowering discount rate. And the last one is lowering the interest rate. First policy is open market operation. This policy is when the central bank may buy short-term bonds or government securities and treasury bills from individuals as well as institutions. The purchase of securities can increase the money supply and increase purchasing power of individuals and firms. Secondly, the reserves requirement refers to the amount of reserves commercial banks are required to keep in the central bank. In this case, the central bank lowers this reserves requirement to increase cash resources of commercial banks so they can offer more loans to public and businessmen. As the third one, discount rate is known as the bank rate. A decline in the discount rate is followed by a decline in other interest rates, which leads to increased borrowing and higher investment by private businessmen. As the fourth one is, the central bank may persuade commercial banks to decrease their rates of interest on deposits from the public. This will reduce the level of savings and increase the purchase of goods and services from the public. Fiscal policy refers to the level of regulations of the government spending, taxation, and public debt. There are two types of options under fiscal policy. The first one is decrease in taxes. Second one is increase in government expenditure. First one is decrease in taxes. To control unemployment, the government reduces the general burden of taxation on the community. By reducing excess duty, taxes will increase the consumption expenses of the people. A reduction in business corporate tax will increase in investment, thus employment will increase. The second one is increase in government expenditure. This will directly affect a lump of demand. For example, an increase in the salary of the workers creates more development which may reduce unemployment rate. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jaclyn Kho Beng anak David Pada. I'm going to present about impact of COVID-19 on inflation and how monetary policy and fiscal policy can be used to solve the problem. The impact of COVID-19 on inflation. The COVID-19 pandemic has led many countries to implement social distancing, lockdown, and travel restrictions, which have resulted in a collapse in the world economy unprecedented in peacetime. The Great Lockdown entails a combination of substantial shock to both demand and supply. It is therefore plausible that the crisis may lead to inflation. Inflationary pressure may arise from increase in production costs due to interrupted supply chain and to the impact of social distancing restriction on labor supply. On the graph that have been shown, a large spike in inflation shows cumulative monthly inflation over the 5 months running to 17 May for all years from 2013 to 2020. In the first 3 months of 2020, month-to-month inflation is close to zero and similar to previous years. However, in the month 18 March to 17 of April, there is a large increase in inflation of 2.4 percentage point in the month 18 April to 17 May. This inflationary spike is unprecedented across all comparison years and constitutes more inflation than normally occurs in a year. It showed that the increase in prices mainly happened in the first week of the USA lockdown, which began on 23 March 2020, and that a key driver was a reduction in the fraction of promotional transactions as retailers cut back on both price promotion and quantity discount. This fall is promotion contrasts with the Great Recession, during which consumers purchased more on sale. Monetary policy on inflation. The first is to increase interest rate through the central bank. When the Federal Reserve increases its interest rate, banks then have no choice but to increase their rate as well. When banks increase their rate, fewer people want to borrow money because it costs more to do so, while that money accrues at higher interest. So spending drops, prices drop, and inflation slows. The second tool is to increase reserve requirement on the amount of money banks are legally required to keep on hand to cover withdrawals. The more money banks are required to hold back, the less they have to lend to consumers. If they have less to lend, consumers will borrow less, which will decrease spending. The third method is to directly or indirectly reduce the money supply by enacting policies that encourage the reduction of the money supply. Two examples of this include calling in debt that are owed to the government and increase the interest paid on bonds so that more investors will buy them. Fiscal policy on inflation. The meaning of fiscal is higher income tax and or lower government spending will reduce aggregate demand, leading to lower growth and less demand through inflation. By keeping the value of the pound high, it will help reduce inflationary pressures. There have two methods can be used on fiscal policy on inflation. First is action to save life globally. To save life, government should finance additional health and emergency service as much as needed. First, countries with limited health care capacity cannot adequately scale up resources. Second, borrowing constraints in many emerging markets and developing economies require shifting expenditures toward the health sector while safeguarding social protection spending and vital public service, such as transport, energy, and communication. Second is protects livelihood with targeted fiscal measures. Social distancing necessary to slow the spread of the virus. With ghost school, restaurant, shopping center, office, and factories, inevitable carries economic costs. People and businesses need large, timely, and targeted fiscal support to remain afloat. Countries' institutional and financial capacity will influence the size of the lifelines they can offer along with the design and type of measures, such as the first one is advanced economies can rely on a wide range of instruments on the spending, tax, and liquidity front to support people and firms given their strong tax benefit system. In the United States, for example, measures include extended unemployment benefits, including for the self-employed, payroll tax deferral, and wage subsidies to small and medium enterprise. Then, emerging market and developing economies typically have less room in the budget to respond. They face several shocks: the pandemic, a steep drop in demand from abroad for their goods and services, plunging commodity prices, capital flight, and higher borrowing costs in financial market. Also, they have relatively less developed tax benefit system. Thank you.